I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. We got a really packed show for you tonight. We're going to talk about drugs and mental health and tolling, but let's start with the biggest of them all, Measure 110. How do you feel about that law? We have new polling that reflects frustration. And while that may not be very surprising, it's still our big story tonight. We get emails and voicemails about Measure 110 almost every day. The vast majority question why on earth the measure has not been repealed yet. Although we still do hear from a few folks who say it has not had time, it needs more time to show its benefits. Now there's a poll from a well-respected Emerson college, and it shines a light on how many Oregonians feel about decriminalizing user amounts of hard drugs. Before we get into some of the results, let's talk sample size so we know what we're dealing with. 1,000 Oregonians were surveyed over the course of 2 days earlier this month. Emerson used phone calls, emails, and an online panel. The margin of error was plus or minus 3%. Okay, those are the details. Now that we know what we're talking about, let's look at the results. The first question of the survey is perhaps the most important. People got two options: repeal 110 completely or leave it as is. 56% of Oregonians say enough is enough, get rid of it already. And when we dig deeper, the numbers get a bit more lopsided. When asked if parts of 110 should be repealed to bring back penalties for possession of small amounts of hard drugs or leave 110 as it is, 64% say consequences for hard drugs need to return. Now, there are a number of other questions included in the poll, but let's highlight two more regarding homelessness and safety. First, on homelessness, 54% of people polled think that Measure 110 has increased homelessness in their communities. 38% say it has no impact. 8% say 110 has actually decreased homelessness. All right, how about safety? Half the voters polled say 110 makes the community less safe. 30% say there's been no change, and 20% say it actually makes it a little bit safer. It's worth noting that overall Measure 110 draws its strongest support from voters in Oregon's 1st congressional district, which covers much of Portland. 110's strongest opposition, well, that lies in the state's 2nd congressional district, which covers most of eastern Oregon. As our team was poring over the results of the survey, we started wondering who paid for this. Turns out it's a group called the Foundation for Drug Policy Solutions. They work to educate lawmakers and the public to try and prevent drug use, treat addiction, and work towards recovery. The foundation's president and CEO is a man named Kevin Sabet, and he's no stranger to drug policy. He's worked in the field for over 25 years and even worked as a White House drug policy advisor, most recently with former President Obama. We caught up with him this week and asked a simple question: why commission a poll like this? And a quick note, we did our interview over Zoom and his camera may be a little bit shaky at times.
There's widespread dissatisfaction with the way that the dollars have been doled out, with the amount of treatment that's available, and really with the lack of accountability. So we decided, why don't we commission a poll with one of the top New York Times rated pollsters in the country and see, what an unbiased poll of 1,000 people, which in Oregon is quite large for a sample. And let's see what happens. And our poll actually really confirmed what our anecdotal research has shown, which is that Measure 110 in people's minds is a failure, that the legalization of drugs is really an unmitigated public health and public safety disaster, because we've legalized drugs before. They were called OxyContin, prescription opioids, alcohol, and tobacco. And if you take those three classes of drugs and put them together, they've caused more damage than fentanyl has ever caused, than illegal heroin has ever caused, than even illegal methamphetamine has ever caused. And that's because when you legalize a drug, the price plummets, commercialization increases, access and availability increases, and therefore addiction increases. And so, we don't have a great track record in our country. The train's left the station on alcohol and tobacco, although with tobacco, we're seeing, huge, obviously, restrictions. I mean, you can't smoke in public anymore, let alone in private. I mean, it's very, very, we have really pushed back against cigarettes. But I'm not saying, we're going to prohibit alcohol anytime soon, but we do know that the legalization of opioids caused huge problems. That's the whole issue with Purdue Pharma and the pill mills and the pain medication overprescribing. I think our experience is that legalization is not good for our country. And I think, what we're seeing even with Measure 110 is this sort of, legalization light, which is really what it is, hasn't been good either. And most people agree with that.
Now, this poll could certainly be used as ammunition for people against Measure 110 if a repeal effort comes along. We asked Sabet about the future of drug policy. As someone who's worked with presidents before, we figure his outlook maybe is going to hold some weight. He claims the way things have happened in Oregon when it comes to drugs has all been part of a lengthy plan.
Well, we know the playbook. The playbook was to legalize medical marijuana, then legalize non-medical marijuana, then legalize psychedelics, which Oregon has done, then decriminalize drugs like heroin and fentanyl, and then legalize those drugs. So this is like Oregon is a perfect case example. Remember, Oregon was the first state to decriminalize marijuana, not legalize, but in the 1970s. So, the activists, that's not like a coincidence that Oregon was also the first state to decriminalize all drugs. This is part of a very well thought out multi-decade plan by those who want to legalize drugs and the billionaires that are behind it. And the billionaires from both sides of the aisle. You have the libertarians on the far right, and you have far left as well. And so, I do think that if Oregon repeals or replaces Measure 110 or continues to have the buyer's remorse, which is certainly where the momentum is, this could stop the legalization movement in its tracks, because this really puts a dent into those plans of the legalization advocates.
So what do you think about all that? How do you think drug policy will evolve in the coming years? Let us know how you feel about Measure 110, will you? Do you think the Emerson poll was accurate or not? Lots of questions in there. Pick one or answer them all. Email us. The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. From one measure to another, let's turn our attention now to Measure 113. That was our big story yesterday. It was about the Republican lawsuit challenging the Secretary of State's interpretation of 113. She determined that lawmakers with 10 or more unexcused absences cannot run for re-election in 2024. Now, 5 GOP senators have argued the actual language in the Constitution says they can run in 2024, but not in the following election in 2028. It's a bit confusing, but for the full explanation, check out yesterday's segment on the KGW YouTube channel. We asked for your thoughts on the lawsuit, as well as how you interpreted Measure 113 when you voted yes or no back in November.
I voted yes on Measure 113, and my intent is that if anybody walks out and does not serve as they are been elected to, they should no longer be allowed to run for re-election. That was my intent in voting yes.
Seems pretty straightforward. Danny wrote to us to say, what about the will of the people? I don't care if Pat Doris has respect for the political hack DiLorenzo. We clearly passed 113 to stop the BS walkouts.
We all know exactly what we voted for. And if they do boycott on our dime, they do not get to run for re-election in the next election, not 2028. That's so absurd.
Again, pretty clear on her intent there. So while many of you agree with the Secretary of State's ruling, there are certainly some who do not. A viewer named Mike wrote in, Measure 113 should be overturned. It, in essence, threatens the minority if they speak out. Hopefully a court will agree. Full disclosure, I proudly voted no on Measure 113 and would gladly vote that way again. The minority needs every tool they can get to hold the tyrannical majority accountable.
I believe that DiLorenzo's interpretation of Measure 113 is the correct one. I don't think that any one person, including the Secretary of State, has the right to reinterpret a law passed by the voters in contradiction to what the language clearly states is now part of our Constitution.
And how about this from Martin? I voted for 113, but no doubt about it, the language of the law was messed up. What the voters intended doesn't hold water in the land of the rule of law. Both the lawyer representing Republicans John DiLorenzo and the Attorney General's office have now asked the Oregon Supreme Court to take a look at this and give an expedited answer. That means soon. We're told it could take, though, up to 6 months before we get that decision. We'll keep an eye on it for you. There's one more element to this story that we think is kind of interesting. Another viewer named Mike wrote in to us to ask, curious, who's paying for the high-powered attorney suing over Measure 113? Is it the Republicans or the taxpayers? If it's the taxpayers, I guess no good deed goes unpunished. Well, Mike, the short answer to that question is It's the Republicans, not the taxpayers, paying for the legal challenge. They created a new political action committee during the walkout earlier this year. They called it Oregon's 13 Constitutional Defense Fund. The name simply references the 13 senators, 12 Republicans and 1 independent, who represented the minority party in the Senate this past year. Because that fund is registered with the state, that means that we do have access to some of their financial records, and their latest transaction gives us the information we're looking for. On an account payable charge of nearly $63,000 to the Davis Wright Tremaine LLP law firm. And if you search John DiLorenzo's name, the lawyer representing the Republicans, there you have it. He's a partner at that very firm. It's a game of connect the financial dots. Or you can email the treasurer for the fund and ask if that money's for DiLorenzo and the 113 lawsuit, to which he responded, yes. I guess if you want to take the shortcut, you could do that. So that's another option. Oregon's 13 Constitutional Defense Fund only has $4,000 in its coffers now, so they do have quite of a deficit to make up when DiLorenzo's bill comes due. But if you donate to that political action committee anytime soon, pretty safe bet your donation will be used to help pay for this latest legal battle. Coming up next on The Story, Portland has released the map that shows where homeless people can and cannot camp overnight once the daytime camping ban is enforced, if it ever is. Our Blair Best went to one neighborhood in southeast Portland today that's been overrun with camps for years. How are homeowners and campers reacting to what the map shows for that neighborhood? Well, that's next when The Story returns. Portland's daytime camping ban is not being enforced right now, but if or when it is enforced, there will be no camping allowed anywhere during the day in the city of Portland. At night, though, people will be allowed to camp in the gray-white zones shown on this map. So what do the housed and the houseless think of these new restricted areas? And what about parts of town that will be available for the homeless people to camp in? Blair Best went to find out.
It's now roughly 2 months into the city of Portland's daytime ban on homeless camping. This map of where people can and cannot camp at night has been out for a few weeks now, but few people actually know about it.
Here's the map.
Oh my God. That's like on the entire outskirts of, that's f***ing What the heck?
Angelique camps off Southeast 80th in Rhine, one of the streets where camping is allowed at night if she doesn't have access to shelter.
That's not that bad. I mean, that is kind of stupid. What are we supposed to do with our stuff?
So the red is where people cannot camp.
So on the richer side of town. That's interesting.
Christina lives across the street.
So our neighborhood apparently is free range.
She was hoping her street would be included in the ban, given how her neighborhood seems to be a magnet for camps and drug use.
This street has been hit so hard over the last 7 years. Yeah, I mean, the fact that they still, to this day, are like, who cares? We're going to protect all these other neighborhoods first. Yeah, that's heartbreaking to me.
To be clear, under the updated city code, camping from the hours of 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. is banned on all public property. And at night, and only if there is no access to housing or shelter, people are allowed to camp in certain areas. Those areas are in gray on this map, but a big question still remains.
I don't know how in the heck that map is going to mean anything. How are they going to enforce it?
The city says violators of the ban will get 2 warnings. More than that could result in fines or jail time.
We'll rock and roll. But I would not consider this camping. It would be more like I'm in the transition, like I'm hiking.
Mark has been on the streets for 15 years.
That is, I think, a bunch of bedding.
He now lives out of this shopping cart, so he can stay mobile under the camping ban.
Oh, wow. Wow, look at that. What about the gray area?
What gray area?
Like
all in there? Yeah, that's allowed overnight.
Oh, wow.
If you
Okay.
don't have access to shelter.
I see.
We showed him the map too.
You know, there's lots of options for overnight, short timers.
Now, as you just saw, some people haven't even seen this map or know much about the ban at all. The mayor's office tells us they're handing out the map and other educational materials to outreach workers in batches, leaving some people to access this material on their own.
Well, see, I don't have access to that because I went to federal prison for hacking. So, I'm not able to access any internet device at all.
We hadn't actually heard about this recent map that came out from the camping ban until today.
Courtney Dodds is with the Union Gospel Mission, where they serve about 500 homeless people a week. She believes there needs to be more overall clarity and detail around the ban.
So if you can't camp, where can you go? How easy is it to get in there? Are the service providers of it, aware of what's happening? And so I think clear information as much as possible for everyone would be real helpful.
Now, this map was the city's next step in their educational phase of this camping ban, with enforcement, as we understand, starting next month, though it's still unclear what exactly that piece will look like. Meanwhile, the city is adding more shelter beds, but even with the roughly 200 new beds added in Southeast Portland at the large sanctioned campsite there, it's still not nearly enough to keep up. Blair Best, KGW News.
Now, if you'd like to see the map for yourself, you can find it now on KGW.com. By the way, Blair asked the city for more details on the map itself and also asked to talk to Mayor Wheeler about the educational phase of the camping ban. She's still waiting to hear back. And when it comes to the camp she reported on today, unfortunately, she's no stranger to that part of town when it comes to reporting on homeless issues.
All right, so I wanted to share some more background on that camp off Southeast 80th in Rhine. It's right off Southeast Powell, and it has been a problem spot for neighbors there for years now. I think I've done 2 to 4 stories about the camps there. And I mean, the neighbors recognize me at this point. And one woman even said, I'm getting kind of tired, or the woman that we talked to in the story said, I'm getting kind of tired of being on the news about how bad my neighborhood is. And I mean, I feel for her. That camp attracts a lot of drug use. We saw it today. It attracts a lot of mess and trash and garbage. And 2 people in that neighborhood have moved in the past year due to that camp. So the fact that that street is not included on the camping ban is infuriating to these people. I mean, they've reported this camp hundreds of times to the city and get little response. It's been cleared 3 times in recent months, and it just comes back. And I think that's, you know, this never-ending cycle that we are constantly reporting on and people are constantly living out there. Is the homeless people have nowhere to go, or claim they have nowhere to go, and the residents, you know, get about 2 weeks hiatus of having to camp out front of their house, and then it just returns. So I think this map of where people can and cannot camp overnight is hopeful to some people, but then there are going to be problem spots like Southeast 80th and Rhine where it's not included on the map. So if people are following this map at all, that would technically be a place where tents are allowed at night when there's nowhere else for them to go. And for people who live there, like I said, it's just terrible for them.
All right, thank you, Blair. Appreciate that. Coming up next on the story, tolling is certainly a big topic here in Oregon, but a lawmaker from our area just introduced a bill in Congress to permanently kill the idea of tolling in the Beaver State. We'll hear from Lori Chavez DeReamer on this bold plan and if it stands a chance when the story returns. This is the last week of the KGW School Supply Drive. We've raised enough cash and supplies with your help to send about 18,000 kids to class with the supplies they need. One of the best ways you can still help is to give online. Go to kgw.com/school and click Donate Cash. We want to thank On Point Community Credit Union, Safeway, Pacific Power, and Dick's Auto Group for everything they've done to make this year's supply drive such a great success. Yes, now to tolls in Oregon. Congresswoman Lori Chavez DeRemer has introduced a bill in Congress that would stop tolls in Oregon. She called her bill the No Tolls on Oregon Roads Act. It specifically would keep the federal government from authorizing tolling on I-5 and 205, two interstates that the State Department of Transportation very much do want to toll. While that's a hot topic at the state level, it's not at the federal level, and it seems to me highly unlikely this will ever go anywhere in Congress. But Chavez DeRemer is a member of the Highway Transit Subcommittee, and you know what? Who knows? She might be able to get a hearing on the idea. I talked with the rep about her hopes late this afternoon.
So the new bill that I dropped today is going to be a permanent kill to this bill, to the tolling in Oregon. So that is what I've dropped. I think that that's the only avenue we can take. And, you know, I want to honor what people have said over and over again, that this is going to be a regressive tax. And I'm a little concerned with it. So I thought we should just kill the deal altogether.
And I can see that for folks who don't want polling, they would love this. But while it's important locally, I can't imagine this gets any national traction. Is this bill really going to go anywhere?
I'll be working with my colleagues. I'm on transportation and infrastructure. I've been talking to them about it. And as we drop this bill, I will build coalition to get this bill passed.
Okay. And will you come back on in a year and we can update whether it's moved at all?
I would love to, because I think Oregonians deserve, that's why I was elected, to fight for them and listen to them. And I think this is going to be an important one. So stay tuned. I think this is going to be a good one for Oregon.
All right, we will. Love that little bit of campaigning there, by the way, right at the end. We'll be back in a year to see what's happened. In the meantime, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. And remember the story, our collective story? Well, that never ends. Also, a programming note, I'll be off for a week. I'm heading to the East Coast for my nephew's wedding. We're heading right where that hurricane's going. But not to worry, our crew here is working on some great shows for you. And I'll see you when I get back. In the meantime, stick around now for the good stuff. It's coming up next.